Welcome everyone. I'm Man Masharia in Nairobi, and this is Africa Matters. This week, we look at a surprise port deal that's at the center of an escalating diplomatic row between Ethiopia and Somalia and raising tensions across East Africa region. On January the 1st, landlocked Ethiopia signed a maritime agreement with Somalia's breakaway province of Somaliland, a move that Mogadishu promptly rejected as a violation of the international law. The African Union, the US, the European Union, and the Arab League have all backed the territorial integrity of Somalia and are calling for restraint and meaningful dialogue between the parties. So, why is it so controversial?
Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991. It has its own government, security force, and its own currency. But Mogadishu firmly opposes the independence claim and has threatened military retaliation should Ethiopia advance with its plans to recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state in return for access to the Red Sea. That's because Ethiopia was cut off from the coast after Eritrea seceded and declared independence in 1993, following a 3-decade war. Since then, Ethiopia has sent most of its trade through the Djibouti port.
Under the yet unpublished Memorandum of Understanding, Somaliland had agreed to lease 20 kilometers of its coast for 50 years to Ethiopia, which says it wants to set up a naval base and a commercial port. In exchange, Hargeisa will get a stake in Ethiopian Airlines and a possible recognition of Somaliland as a sovereign state. Joining me to discuss this regional fallout from the maritime deal is Dr. Hassan Kand, an analyst from the Horn of Africa Institute, who joins me here in Nairobi. Dr. Hassan, thank you very much for making time for this interview. I definitely do appreciate you making the time. What ignites the tension in East African region?
I think the Memorandum of Understanding between Hargeisa and Addis Ababa touches on very sensitive issues of territorial integrity and sovereignty that, of course, has defined much of interstate relations in post-colonial Africa. And it's something that, by and large, was assumed to have been settled. And so to the extent that has revived it, of course, is very sensitive and is going to increase and heighten tensions as we see today.
This is something that is creating tension, especially in the East Africa. How are they affected by it?
The challenge is within this region, the region was already in turmoil. And to the extent that you're having renewed tensions between Somalia and the government in Ethiopia, of course, is concerning. Remember, for us to resolve the ongoing conflicts and issues within the East African region, there is need to be diplomatic rapprochement, as well as some kind of consensus with regard to what issues need to be dealt with. But today, as we speak, the region is in a state of flux.
Okay, and do you think Ethiopia risks what are the diplomatic options that in this case? Do you think Ethiopia risks armed conflict with Somalia?
There are a number of diplomatic options. One has to do with IGAD, and because both countries are member states of the IGAD group of countries, of nations, and there are efforts underway as we speak to try and resolve those differences. The second has to do with the African Union. And African Union's intervention, or at least its support for IGAD process, is going to be critical, because left on its own or to their own devices, I don't think Ethiopia and Somalia are going to be able to find a solution without the support from outsiders. One impact that this is going to have is it has served to actually create some Somali nationalism. And of course, there will be a desire perhaps to push for the same within Ethiopia. But I think there's little appetite for secessionism in Ethiopia, considering the recently concluded peace between TPLF and the government. And so, even though there may be temptation to push for the same, it's unlikely to happen under the current circumstances.
Do you think Ethiopia has more to gain economically and politically if Somaliland is recognized as a country?
There is no immediate gain economically for Ethiopia, because to be able to actualize that is actually going to take some time. And mind you, this is simply an MOU, it's not legally binding. But politically within the region, of course, Addis Ababa has lost something. And I think this has taken place at a time when the idea of, for instance, violation of territorial integrity is extremely unpopular. And so, granted, Ethiopia has an existential necessity to access the sea. It's a landlocked country. And its desire, of course, is manifested not just in its rhetoric, but also in its actions. Today, as we speak, the port of Djibouti's trade is 90% from Addis Ababa. And so, yes, Ethiopia has an existential necessity to access the sea. But I think the manner in which things are being done today, of course, is leading to a loss of political influence of Addis Ababa within the region. And economically, it's not something that is benefiting today. But of course, in the long run, if that were to become viable, then we're going to see that perhaps Ethiopia is going to have a lot more options in terms of access to the sea as opposed to what it has today.
How do we ensure that these both parties have tend to agree, or there is an agreement between these two parties? How do we maintain the peace?
Maintaining the peace, it has to happen through dialogue. Years ago, the continent decided they were going to have African solutions to African problems. And I think such crisis calls for AU's intervention, as well as supporters of the AU and the region from outside, in the Middle East and elsewhere. And I think there is no alternative to dialogue. They're going to have to talk. You see, in international relations, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors. And so they are stuck together, which means they will have to find a solution to be able to exist as neighboring countries.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for making time for this interview on Africa Matters. We appreciate your time.
And thanks for having me.
And staying in East Africa, we head to Burundi now, where a tense relationship with its neighbor Rwanda has deteriorated further after Bujumbura closed their shared border. The closure is now affecting businesses and livelihoods for both people, as Moses Habyarimana reports.
Frustration, anger and uncertainty. These passengers are stranded, many of them traders who regularly cross the border between Rwanda and Burundi for work. But now that the border has closed, it's having a major knock-on effect. Doreen Shimirimana works for a transport company. She says they are forced to use alternative and longer routes.
The transport business is not doing well compared to before because of the border closures. Initially, we used to get many clients, more than 20 per day, but now they only come to ask about the situation and the itinerary.
Burundi's decision to close the border followed the brutal killing of 20 people, including 12 children in their village. It accuses an armed group that the government says is backed by Rwanda for the killings, but Kigali rejects the allegations. Gerald Habyarimana is among the survivors of the attack. He says he was shot in the arm before he escaped.
They started shooting at us while we were laying here on the ground. I decided to get on my feet and run behind the house. They continued shooting.
Tension between Rwanda and Burundi goes back several years. Burundi accuses Rwanda of masterminding and harboring the people behind a failed coup attempt in 2015.
The border closure is now affecting traveling to Uganda and Kenya. Rwanda says it not only violates the principles of regional bloc, but it risks lucrative cross-border trade.
When Burundi reopened the border in 2022 after a 3-year closure, its exports to East Africa rose from $51 million in 2021 to $55 million in 2022.
This is not a good decision because we lose in terms of our big project, program, which is funded by World Bank and the African Bank.
In the meantime, local people who depend on the crossing for their livelihoods can only wait and hope that their leaders solve their differences. Moses Habyarimana, Africa Matters, Bujumbura.
We cross the border to Rwanda now, where the sudden decision by Burundi to close its borders have raised a number of challenges. Truck drivers and citizens who cross the Nemba border for work have found themselves stranded and their income slashed, as Diana Iriza reports.
Alphonse Muhire, a truck driver and exporter from Rwanda, is distressed. His routine journey to bring goods to Burundi has taken an unexpected turn. The closure of the Nemba border has forced him to drive through Tanzania, adding an extra 8 hours onto his commute. He's worried the cost of the detour will make his business unsustainable.
It's quite unfair to watch the Burundian government make such a drastic decision without a warning. I now have to travel all the way to Tanzania to get my goods to Burundi. It's very costly and time-consuming. Not many exporters will manage this in the long run. This will lead to shortage of goods to import and export.
The Rwandan government says it regrets Burundi's independent choice to close the border, stating that it will hinder the unrestricted movement of goods between the two nations. Economists believe it won't just be trade with Rwanda impacted, but all of Burundi's neighboring countries.
Burundi was occupying the sixth position of export destination for goods for Rwanda, so which is unfortunate. So we are losing a very big market. But on the side of Burundi as well, they are also losing foreign currencies, because if we could import commodity, especially agricultural commodity from there, then they are losing. The crisis is also affecting the region in general, because we are both members of the East African community, and when you see two state members in political tension and conflict, it can escalate to, it can escalate to conflict between more than two countries, because we are bordering each other.
But the shattering does not just impact cross-border trade, but also local businesses. Davi Mushi's restaurant has thrived by serving both Burundians coming into the country and Rwandans heading out. The rhythmic flow of customers is the heartbeat of her business. Now, anticipating a rapid decrease in customers, Davi is being forced to lay off some of her dedicated restaurant employees. I had a team of 40 employees in this small restaurant of mine. But before the end of last week, I had to lay off 30 because we no longer have people using the border. We are making losses already. Burundi's border with Rwanda was opened in 2022 when the two governments were working to mend their relations, which became strained after an attempt coup against the then Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza in 2015. The current Burundian President, Evariste Ndayishimiye, says the coup attempt was orchestrated by individuals affiliated with Red Tabara. Rwanda has refuted allegations it supports the rebel group. But that's little comfort for Alphonse as he reroutes through Tanzania and tries to keep his business rolling. Dana Iriza, Africa Matters, Kigali, Rwanda.
To Kinshasa now, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where local residents are battling huge floods after Congo River burst its banks. The city has a population of 18 million, and residents say it's the worst flooding in nearly half a century. Obaida Hito has more.
Kinsasha's streets look more like waterways. Unprecedented flooding has forced people and goods to find alternative ways to move around the Congo River basin.
This is the first time I have seen a flood like this since I was born. In 2019, the river overflowed to the edge of the statuette of Tintin and Snowy. But this year, we were surprised. The water is not receding.
The DRC's River Management Authority, which oversees the Congo's 25,000 kilometers of waterways, warned citizens of impending flooding in December. But locals say the water has risen significantly higher than in the past.
Before, the water came up to our knees, but now it comes up to our chests. I had the idea to get a canoe, and now I have 3. We support the government because the government is waiting for the water to recede so they will build a bridge.
The river basin rose to more than 6 meters following this year's seasonal rain. Affected by climate change, the torrential rain has overwhelmed river ports, preventing intercity travel and trade.
With the press release, the entire population was alerted and understood that it was dangerous, which means that everyone no longer had enough time to evacuate, but at least everyone had time to take shelter. And for us, that was good news.
With more than 100,000 people in need of emergency aid and hundreds of homes completely submerged, Officials say the extent of the damage won't be clear until water levels recede in February. Obeidehito, Africa Matters.
Some of the challenges that African countries are facing have been the focus at this year's World Economic Forum. The World Bank warns that many middle and low-income countries are on the path to a debt crisis. And the International Monetary Fund says that more than half of Africa's low-income countries are either experiencing or at high risk of debt distress. Melinda Nusifora is in Davos for us, and she began this exclusive interview with the forum's Africa expert Chidi Munyati by asking if he thinks the continent was well represented this year.
Absolutely. So the two largest economies in Africa are Nigeria and South Africa. We've had our largest delegations ever from both countries, including 6 ministers from each country and central bank governors. We also have 4 heads of state, namely President Kagame as well as President Akufo-Addo from Ghana.
Debt crisis has been discussed broadly here at Davos. How do African countries get out of the debt crisis that many of them may be facing?
Now, that's a very good question. Over the last 18 months, a third of the African countries have been experiencing double-digit inflation, which of course affects their debt payments, which are as much as 20% for most governments. I think what is needed is growth, and growth includes increasing trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a tool that the continent is looking to drive growth. If it fully implemented, it will be the largest free trade area in the world, 1.2 billion people, with a potential GDP of $3.4 trillion. And it poses significant opportunities for increased growth, increased FDI, transfer of technology and knowledge, as well as for diversification and scaling of economies. But as far as debt in general, there aren't any concrete solutions or ideas that have come forth, because largely the biggest issue is just that African debt is just priced more than the debt in the global north, apples for apples. And so it's it's the interest rate costs that's the issue.
Another big topic discussed here this week has been artificial intelligence. What do you think are the threats and perhaps the opportunities that are specific to the African continent?
Well, the threats for the African continent are clearly the potentially displacing traditional jobs, and that could be a challenge for the emerging workforce. Africa is going to contribute 90% of the growth of the workforce between now and 2050. 1 in 3 young people will be from Africa in 2050, so we're going to be the largest and youngest workforce, and unless they are equipped with the skills to leverage this digital technology, there will be a jobs challenge, and we might not necessarily meet this population boom. The good news is that education is improving on the continent. 2000, only 27% of Africans were graduating from high school, and that number is now 44%. So there is an opportunity, but there is a challenge that we might not necessarily have the skills in time.
Well, a young electrical engineer in the Republic of Congo is putting his skills to good use by turning vegetable waste to cheap and clean energy. Waste management systems are not well developed in the country, and so individual recycling initiatives have arisen in their place to fill up the gap. Brice Kinho has the report.
The Republic of Congo has a waste management problem. A few years ago, it was ranked one of the dirtiest countries in Africa by Forbes magazine because of volume of household waste left in the streets of the country's 2 major cities, Brazzaville and Pointe-Noire. Fed up with the state of his hometown, Destin Bibila began looking for solutions.
We collect vegetable biomass and then carbonize it. We do have several sizes because they are not originally in the same shape, so we grind them to make them uniform. The last stage is production, which consists of molding and drying the Wumela biocarbon and make it available to the public.
An engineer by trade, Bibila saw how household waste could be put to good use by meeting the growing need for cooking energy. The traditional charcoal used by the locals requires thousands of trees to be cut down. But by processing household waste, which contains around 80% plant biomass, Bibila realized he could create biocharcoal, a sustainable alternative. In 2019, he founded Wumela, which means sustainable, and started production.
It's a very strong coal because it's produced by compression and its density is high. This biocoal is produced close to the market, which lowers the cost of production. It's also very affordable. The price of 1 kilogram of Wumela charcoal is 30 US cents, while a kilo of ordinary charcoal is double the price. In addition, Wumela biochar and its ash are excellent organic fertilizers for agriculture.
Wumela biochar is now in high demand.
I was attracted by the fact that the charcoal was made from the rubbish we throw away, and that this man was giving it a second life. I was also attracted by the quality of the product, which took longer to finish than the ordinary charcoal that we use. It allowed me to cook more than I usually do, and I was very satisfied from the first day I used it.
Destin Bibila's initiative is benefiting the community in several ways, addressing waste management, producing environmentally friendly fuel, and providing employment. At the moment, he is able to produce 5 tons of Wumela biochar a year, but by 2030, he hopes to increase that to 50,000 tons. Thus, the technical and financial partners, as well as local and national authorities, support his project, which could be the future of sustainable energy. Brisquet, Africa Matters, Pointe-Noire, Republic of Congo.
Ivory Coast is hosting the continent's most prestigious football competition known as Africa Cup of Nations or AFCON. However, the attendance has been below average despite claims by the Confederation of African Football that most of the high-end matches had already sold out. Doha El Bouyahoui reports on how the championship is playing out.
Attendance has been far below average despite claims by the Confederation of African Football that most of the high-end matches had sold out. Less than 9,000 spectators attended Nigeria's debut game on Sunday at the Olympic Stadium's Ebimpe, which has a capacity of 60,000. And in Bouaké, authorities allowed spectators to attend the Algeria-Angola game for free as few people had tickets. The president of the Ivorian Football Association, Idriss Diallo, was asked about the issue with leaving the opening game between Ivory Coast and Guinea-Bissau that was attended by less than 37,000 people.
We'll try to understand why there are less people. Are the people scared? Is it the rain, the distance, the conditions?
Anticipating a far better turnout, the country's stadiums had undergone rigorous preparation to ensure good pitch quality for the matches. And Senegal's head coach, Aliou Cissé, confirmed earlier this week that the pitch had no problems.
The pitch is okay, the weather is okay, the result is okay for us.
However, Ivory Coast's tropical climate and humid temperatures do pose unique challenges to some players.
All watch African Cup of Nations now, and to play is, I think at 2 o'clock is not what we should, because if you want to see quality, it's not to play in 2 o'clock, and it's, for me it's not, you cannot even imagine to play at 2 o'clock.
Moving forward, it is crucial to address these issues and make necessary adjustments to enhance the overall AFCON experience.
And finally, this week, we head to Southern Africa to explore Victoria Falls, a resort city in northern Zimbabwe, one of the world's largest and most impressive waterfalls that has shaped the city, drawing millions of tourists every year. Let's take a closer look. That wraps up our show. Let us know what you think about the stories we've covered this week and share your ideas on what you'd like us to cover on X using the hashtag Africa Matters. You can also find us on YouTube by searching TRT World Africa Matters. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me and Masharia in Nairobi.